Listen, I know the parts of the Bible you like to hear: floods, fires from heaven, dramatic battles, torture, betrayal, murder, escapes, executions. Nothing spectacular happens in Genesis 23, so most people fly right past it. But this chapter is about death and the price of love. Just a man burying his wife. And if you miss why this matters, you miss something massive about faith, promises, grief, and ownership. This is Genesis 23. Sarah dies, and right away the Bible forces you to stop. Because Sarah isn't just Abraham's wife. She's the woman who walked through everything with him. The wandering, the waiting, the fear, the promises, the failures, the impossible birth of Isaac. She was there for all of it. And now she's gone. Genesis says she dies in Hebron, the land of Canaan. That matters because remember, God promised this land to Abraham and his descendants. But here's the uncomfortable truth. At this point, Abraham doesn't own it. Not really. God promised him a homeland, yet he's still living like a foreigner inside of it. And now death enters the picture. The chapter says Abraham mourned and wept for Sarah. Don't skip over that. The man God called, the man of faith, the man who trusted God enough to offer Isaac, is sitting in grief. Faith does not remove sorrow. That matters right now because some people think strong in God means being emotionally numb. It doesn't. The Bible never pretends death is normal. Death is an enemy, a rupture, something broken. Have you noticed that? How every funeral feels wrong? Like something inside of you screams, this isn't how it's supposed to be. That's because it isn't. Now, the story shifts, and this is where people miss the weight of this chapter. Abraham goes to the Hittites, the people living in the land, and asks for a burial site. Listen carefully to how he describes himself. I am a foreigner and a stranger among you. That line hits hard because this is the man God promised this land to, yet he still calls himself a stranger. You know what that means? Faith sometimes means living inside a promise you haven't fully received yet. And honestly, that's where a lot of people are right now. You pray, you trust, you believe, but your life still feels unfinished, still temporary, still unstable. You're standing in the promise without fully holding it yet. The Hittites offer Abraham free land for the burial. At first, this sounds generous, but Abraham refuses to simply take it. This part is huge. He insists on buying the cave of Machpelah from a man named Ephron. Why? Because Abraham wants a legal possession, a real claim, not borrowed ground, not temporary permission, ownership. This becomes the first piece of the promised land Abraham actually possesses. And it comes through death. That's heavy. Now, watch the negotiation. Because Ancient culture worked differently than ours. Ephron publicly says, "Oh no, take it for free." But this is the part of the public bargaining ritual. Eventually, he names the price: 400 shekels of silver. And it's expensive, very expensive. But Abraham pays it immediately. No argument, no hesitation. Why? Because Abraham believes the promise is real, even if he dies before seeing its fullness. That's faith, not hype, not emotional excitement, not pretending life is easy. Faith is planting yourself in what God said before you see the outcome. And this chapter quietly sets up something massive for the future, because that burial cave becomes the family tomb. Sarah is buried there. Abraham will be buried there. Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, Leah, generation after generation, one burial site becomes a declaration: we belong here. Even before the nation fully exists. But now the chapter turns toward us, because most people spend their entire lives acting like this world is permanent, like they'll be here forever, like death is something that only happens to other people. Genesis 23 destroys that illusion. Sarah laughed with Abraham, walked beside him, survived impossible seasons, and one day she died. And someday, so will you. So what are you building your life on? Comfort? Money? Distraction? Pleasure? Pride? Things that disappear? Because Abraham understood something most people avoid thinking about. This life is temporary, but God's promises are bigger than death. That's the tension sitting underneath this entire chapter. Abraham buries Sarah, yet still believes God will fulfill everything he said, even after death enters the story. And for Christians reading this now, reading chapter 23 of Genesis, that tension points forward, past Abraham, past Sarah, past the grave itself, toward resurrection. Because the Bible never ends with a tomb. Not here, not eventually with Christ. Death wounds, grieves. Death breaks hearts. But Scripture keeps insisting death does not get the final word. So if you think about what Genesis 23 reveals, it reveals that grief is real. Faith is costly. Promises can take generations. And God's people often live like strangers before they finally reach home. And it reveals something else about us. We spend enormous amounts of time avoiding thoughts about death instead of asking what actually survives it. That question changes everything. So where do you fall in this? Are you building your life on temporary things? Or are you planting yourself in something eternal, even if you haven't fully seen it yet? Because Abraham bought a tomb while believing in a future he would never fully see with his own eyes. That kind of faith is rare. May the truth set us all free.